Welcome to the Photoshop Snowman. This is just a quick little project to help you get situated and familiar with the program. First thing we're going to do is we're going to open up a new project. Once you do that, you go to the preset drop-down menu and you change it to US paper. That should give you all the correct settings that we'll need for this project. But before you hit OK, go to background contents and change that from white to transparent. Then just hit OK. Now grab your brush tool. The shortcut for that is going to be B, and make sure that your color picker at the bottom is set to white. What you can do as a quick shortcut is just hit D and then X. D will change your colors to a default black and white, and X will switch between your foreground and background color. Then once we do that, make sure you just have a circular hard edge brush and just make a plain white circle. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go to our move tool, and we can either duplicate it by dragging the layer down to the new layer button and that'll duplicate it, or what we can do is make sure we have a layer selected and use our move tool. Then we can go to the page, hold Alt or Option on Mac, and it will duplicate whatever we drag. Once we do that, I'm just going to use Control T, that's your free transform, and I'm just going to squash down my circle and resize it a bit to get it how I want it to look. And then I'm going to do that with the other two circles as well. Don't worry about getting them perfectly centered right now. There is a handy little align tool that I will show you how to use in a sec once I get them resized. Now I'm going to select all the layers, go up to my top toolbar, and find the vertical align button, and when I hit that, it should align all of the layers I have selected. Now I'm going to go down to my bottom layer, and I'm going to go to the section in the window panel that has lock, and you'll see a bunch of little symbols next to it. These will lock various elements in your layer. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the first one, and that is going to allow me to color on the object itself, and I don't have to worry about going outside of the line, so to speak. Now, when shading snow, it's not a smooth surface like a ball would be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and look through my brushes, and I'm going to scroll down and kind of pick out a rougher looking brush. If you don't see a brush you want to use, there is a little gear up at the top, and you can click on that, and it has a list of different sections you can look through to try and find the brush you want to use. The one I am using should be in assorted or basic brushes. Next, I'm going to go over to the side panel and hit brush. It's going to be the button that looks like a cup with a bunch of paint brushes in it. If you don't see that, you can go to Window and select Brush, and it should pop out for you. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Shape Dynamics and make sure Control is set to pen pressure. I'm also going to change the angle jitter and slide that all the way to the right so it's set at 100%. What that does is it spins the brush around as you're painting, and it'll create a bit of a different look, or in this case more texture. Then I'm going to go to Brush Tip Shape and check that my spacing is set at its lowest possible setting. That way we don't have any spaces between where it's putting down paint. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new layer. I'm just going to name that Color. The way you can rename a layer is you just double click where it has the title, and it should just let you type in a new name. What this is going to do is this is going to act a bit as our color palette. I'm going to pick some colors I want to use for shading, and then I'm just going to lay them down so that way when I go to paint I can just use my color picker and just easily select them. Now, to keep in mind with shading is it doesn't always have to be black to make things darker. You can simply use darker shades of something. Like with snow, when it's shaded, you can kind of see it kind of takes on a blue hue rather than black. And it'll just give us a little richer color. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to lock the layer using that lock at the very end of those symbols. And what that does is it stops any editing whatsoever on that layer. So that way I don't accidentally go back and color on it another time. Now I'm going to use my eyedropper and just get my two colors set that I want to use first. And I can use X again to switch between that foreground and background color. Now I'm just going to zoom in. That's Control plus and Control minus to zoom in and out. And before I start coloring, I'm going to hit this little button that has a pen and a circle next to opacity. And I'm going to hit that, and what that's going to do is that's going to allow pen pressure to control not only the width of the brush, but also the opacity. And I'm also going to turn it down a bit so it doesn't go on as thick initially. Then once I get the brush how I want it to look, I can just go in and start painting. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to follow the curve of the circle. And I'm just going to keep putting down brush strokes layer by layer. When you're painting, it's not going to be a one stroke and you're done. You just want to slowly build up because it's much easier to go darker than it is to go lighter. I'm also going to make sure that I add a shadow underneath the top sphere here so that way it looks like it's actually there. I'm just slowly building up the layers. As you're shading, it's good to keep in mind where your light source is at all times. In this case, my light source is kind of going to be to the right and a little back. And remember, if you make a mistake that you don't like, you can use Control Z, or if you want to step back multiple times, what you have to do is hit Control Alt Z. On Mac, this should be Command Alt Z or Command Z. I don't like how this one little spot looks, so I'm just going to use my smudge tool real quick just to move that shadow a bit to get it to curve the way I want it to. I wouldn't use smudge a lot because that uses up a lot of processing power and that can kill your machine real easy. Now I'm going to move up to my middle snowball and I'm going to make sure that it's locked with that first icon, and I'm just going to shade it similarly to how I shaded the bottom. Remember to just keep building up those layers. It's easier to go darker than it is to go lighter. Now remember, you don't always have to stick to the colors that we laid out in our little color palette layer. If you want to go darker or lighter, or you want a slightly different shade, you can always just go to your color picker and click on it and just pick a new color. Okay, now I'm just going to save my project real quick. That's something you always want to be doing, is always be saving, because you never know when it's going to crash. Now in the newer versions of Adobe Photoshop and Adobe Illustrator and some of their other products, it does have a recovery feature, but you can't always rely on that to bring it up to back where you were at when it crashed. So before I move on to the head, I don't want to go in and start shading it like I did the bottom two snowballs, because that's going to have some extra accessories on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down next to the new layer button. There's going to be a folder. Hit that. That's going to create a new group. What we're going to use that for is it will create a folder that we can hold like-minded pieces together. So in this case, it's going to be the head pieces. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get a regular round brush, and I'm just going to double check that it has pen pressure, that the spacing is set to 0, and this is going to be how we make our coal. Now, when you are drawing, feel free to use as many references as you need. It's always good to look back at what actually exists when you're painting to help get an idea of what you want it to look like. So I'm just going to look at what coal, kind of what the texturing looks like, and then I'm just going to start drawing, but first I'm going to change this black to a dark gray. That way I can add darker hues to it easier. And it doesn't really matter if I get smooth edges on this, because if you looked at the references, you can kind of see they're not smooth. They kind of break off into slates. Then I'm just going to use my eraser to get rid of this ragtag bit. Then I'll fill in the rest here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a light gray color, and I'm just going to go in and just add those shines that we saw in the reference image. I'm just going to lay it down layer by layer and just slowly build it up in places. Going to add the slates of rock, and I'll go in later with lighter and darker colors and just brighten and darken to kind of give it a bit more depth. Now, once I kind of get the coal the way I want it to look, I can use Control T again to transform it, and then I can hold Alt to duplicate it. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rotate a bit so it's a little less obvious that we just duplicated the same coal. Next, I'm going to make a new layer on top of the two coals, and I'm going to change this top drop down menu, and I'm going to set it to color dodge. What this is it's our blending options, and depending on what we set it to, it's going to react differently to the coals. Then what you can do is you can just go to that drop down menu and select whatever, just randomly select a blending option, and then what you can do is using your arrow keys, you can kind of scroll up and down through the different options and see what it does to the layers underneath. I kind of like how overlay looks, so I'm going to use that. Next we're going to make a pipe. So I'm going to pick a yellowish color. You can make your pipe whatever color you want, and I'm going to make a new layer. Now to make the stem, I'm just going to, again, this is making sure you have a nice round solid brush, I'm just going to press down and I'm going to hold shift and drag across, and that will create a straight line for me. Now I'm just going to slowly start building up the pipe part, and again I'm using that shift to create those straight lines. Now I'm going to go up to my color layer, unlock it, and I'm just going to lay down some color swatches for lighter and different shades. And what I'm going to do for this is once I get them down, I'm going to use my mixer brush rather than my regular paintbrush. And the way you get to that is you right click on the paintbrush, and I'll give you a bunch of different tools you can use. Pick the mixer brush. It should have a teardrop next to it. What this does is it acts similar to a regular paintbrush. And there's a bunch of settings up here that you can choose how wet you want the paint to be, how much paint you want loaded on, how much you want to flow off the paintbrush. You can hit a setting that will clear your brush each time you use it, or you can just leave it on and it'll slowly start building up colors onto your brush as if you were working with paint. This is good for mixing colors and making a slow gradient. So now when I'm painting my pipe, I'm just going to use a mix of the regular paintbrush and the mixer brush, and I'm just slowly going to build up my colors. And I'm going to pick another color here just to add a wood grain to it. Again, you can make your pipe look however you want it to look. Okay, now that I kind of have my pipe looking how I want it to, I'm going to make a new layer, and I'm just going to add some shading. And I'm not going to worry about staying in the lines right now. I'm just going to add my shades and my highlights and get it to look how I want. Then I'm going to go up to the blending options and pick a mode that I like it. Then what I'm going to do is, if you hold Control and click on the thumbnail for the pipe, it will create marching ants around your pipe. And what you do is you select your marquee tool, so the shortcut for that will be M, right click inside where the marching ants are, and click select inverse, and that will select everything outside of the selection of that layer. And what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the layer where we had our shadows and highlights. I'm just going to hit delete, and that'll get rid of anything that's outside of the line. Then I'm going to go through the different options on the blending menu and kind of pick a setting that I think looks nice. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to place my pipe kind of where I want it in the face. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to erase a little bit of the end here, just kind of make it look like it's stuck in the snow. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new group and a new layer for the hat. And I'm just going to pick a couple of random colors. You want to make sure that when you make the hat that it goes with the curve of your sphere. So I'm going to make 2 layers. I'm just going to duplicate this one and then erase the parts I don't need. What I want to do is I want to separate the trim from the back of the hat. It'll just make it a little bit easier when we go to color it. So I'm just going to add a pattern to it real quick. So what I'm going to do now is I want to add shading and whatnot. But when I add the shading, I don't want it to go accidentally outside of the hat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new layer. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do that control, click on the thumbnail of the back. And then I'm going to hit this button that has a rectangle with a circle cut out of it. And what that will do, and make sure that you have the shadow layer selected. Because when you click on that button, it's going to create a mask for our hat. And what will happen is it will stay inside of where we have selected. It's another option that you can do instead of using that lock icon that I showed you earlier. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select a darker hue, and I'm just going to start kind of coloring it. And again, I kind of want this to have a bit of texture to it, so I'm going to pick something that's not strictly a round hard brush. I'm going to pick something with a bit more wiggle to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the back of my hat layer, and I'm going to double click on it. What that should do is it should pop up with a layer style menu. What I'm going to do then is I'm going to check mark pattern overlay and click on it. What that'll do is it'll lay a pattern over whatever is on that layer. And if you click on this gear, or it's similar to the brushes, there's going to be a whole bunch of different sections that you can look through and find a pattern that you want. And then I'm just going to do the same with the rim of the hat. And what I want to do, if I want to copy one layer style to another, is I can go to that FX, right click on it, copy layer style, and then I can go to whatever layer I want to copy it to, right click and paste layer style. Okay, now that I have all of the pieces on my face that I want, I can go in and shade this top snowball now. And you got to make sure that you take into account how each of the different items will interact with your light and will cast onto the snow itself. So you're going to add more than just the simple curvature shadow that we added earlier. I'm going to add some shading underneath the hat. I'm going to add some shading kind of around the coals and around and under the pipe. What to remember with the pipe is your circle isn't a flat object, so it's not going to have a shadow directly under it like it would if it was in front of a piece of paper. It's going to curve with the curve of the snow. Now my snowman's looking a little plain, so I'm just going to add some coal buttons by again just duplicating my eyeballs I'm going to erase some of them so it looks like they're pushed into the snow like we did with our pipe. And I'm just going to add a little bit of shading around them as well. Now I can start adding in my background. And I'm just going to paint it like we did the rest of the snowman. Now we have a lovely little winter snowman, and you can customize them however you want to.